In 1959, the United States of America gained its 50th member, Hawaii, which had been a territory of the US since 1898, earned its place as the final star on the Stars and Stripes, becoming the beloved vacation spot and island paradise we now know today. Hawaii's image is associated with a beauty of culture and experiences ranging from luaus to hula dancing to volcanoes and Pearl Harbor. But much of the territory's original history and culture is now unknown to the American masses, and that has a lot to do with how the US acquired Hawaii. Before becoming a state and even a territory of the United States, the Hawaiian Islands were contrarily an independent, unified kingdom for 8 decades. From King Kamehameha to Queen Liliuokalani, Hawaii's monarchy was fully autonomous and merely formed friendly relations with the governments of the United States, Britain, and others. Strong alliances were building, and all was well for the locals of Hawaii, a Polynesian people from the Marquesas Islands who had made their way to the Big Islands in canoes hundreds of years prior. There was a technical change made to the monarchy in 1887, but this still occurred within a sovereign kingdom. The adjustment came with the Bayonet Constitution, named as such due to the forcefulness utilized to convince King Kalakaua to sign it. The new constitution was originally drafted by Hawaii's Minister of Interior Lauren A. Thurston and stripped the monarch down to nothing more than a figurehead, creating a constitutional monarchy. Under pressure from 3,000 residents and an armed militia, the king had signed away his power and approved the shift. But there was one problem with this. Those 3,000 residents were not typical Hawaiians. The locals of the Hawaiian Islands were welcoming people, and friendly relations between their nation and their European and American friends sparked an influx of migrants from those countries. A good portion of these incoming Europeans and Americans, particularly the latter, were Protestant missionaries who hoped to spread their faith and beliefs to this newly discovered destination. Despite Hawaii's pre-existing religious and traditional values, the missionaries often had remarkable success in either fully converting the Hawaiians or at least inspiring them to begin to blend Christianity with their own faith. Christianity started to flourish across the islands and even grew to influence new laws being passed by the government. With the drafting of an 1840 constitution, the Hawaiian monarchy was then deemed a Christian monarchy and thus founded on Christian values. For the missionaries, this was a tremendous accomplishment. But it wasn't just religious success that they, or their descendants, were looking for. Many of the now Hawaiian-born European or American descent Christians were also becoming businessmen and finding themselves increasingly involved in the government's affairs. This was often to the detriment of the locals, due to the fact that these foreign descent businessmen and wealthy were generally attempting to influence the government in their own favor to give themselves better commercial gains and power. Simultaneously, commercial ties between Hawaii and allies such as Britain and America were improving significantly, and after a controversial election in 1874, both nations sent in troops to help quell riots on the Hawaiian Islands. Still, Hawaii was an independent nation, although there were new puppet masters pulling the strings. Those 3,000 residents and armed militiamen who had convinced King Kalakaua to give away his kingly powers were those new puppet masters. They were the foreign-born and foreign-descent businessmen, missionaries, and so forth who wanted to pull the government in their own favor. And this was only the start. When King Kalakaua passed, his sister, Liliuokalani, had become queen. She came to the crown determined to rectify the mistakes she believed her brother had been forced to make. This included in 1893 her declaration that she intended to create a new constitution which would turn the kingdom back into an absolute monarchy. Of course, that wouldn't work out well for the businessmen who had worked so hard to manipulate the government onto their side. So, the reaction from these newcomers was immediate. On January 14, 1893, Hawaii's European and American businessmen and the like, such as the lawyer and cousin to the owner of the famed Hawaiian fruit company, Sanford B. Dole, came together to form the Committee of Safety. The goal of the committee? Stage a coup d'etat. While this alone seems outlandish, it wasn't even the most far-fetched part of it all. In fact, the committee, knowing they would need some heavy support to overthrow Hawaii's 80-year-old monarchy, reached out to the U.S. minister to the Hawaiian kingdom. This man, John L. Stevens, was stunningly easy to convince. Stevens responded to the requests for support by sending 300 U.S. Marines to the Big Island under the guise of protecting American lives. With the threat of the American military on their side, the committeemen set the coup into action. Queen Liliuokalani was a determined woman who believed that Native Hawaiians needed to take their power back, and that her foreign allies would never do such a horrific thing as to overthrow her monarchy. Nevertheless, she realized that resisting the committee, due to their Marine aid, would mean firing on United States servicemen, thus triggering a war her nation just couldn't win. As a tragic result, Liliuokalani surrendered. In a letter to Sanford Dole, the Queen said the following: "Now, to avoid any collision of armed forces and perhaps the loss of life, I do, under this protest and impelled by said force, yield my authority until such time as the government of the United States shall, upon the facts being presented to it, undo the action of its representatives and reinstate me in the authority which I claim as the constitutional sovereignty of the Hawaiian Islands." Much to the subsequent dismay of the Hawaiian people, Dole and his allies wasted no time setting up a provisional government to replace the Queen, made up of the members of the Committee of Safety, which itself would soon be replaced by Sanford B. Dole as the president of the new Hawaiian Republic on July 4, 1894. After the January 16th coup d'etat, the Queen still stood by the belief that upon realizing what had been done, the United States would support her reascension to the throne. And her letters to the U.S. president didn't go unnoticed either. The Grover Cleveland administration commissioned the Blunt Report to look into the overthrow of Liliuokalani. The report found Stevens and the United States as a result guilty on all counts of the illegal coup, calling the whole situation an act of war. While this was a positive outcome for the Queen, the provisional government still in control at the time refused to recognize the results of the report or reinstate Liliuokalani. To make matters worse, the U.S. Congress responded to this in 1984 by commissioning its own report. This investigation became known as the Morgan Report and found everyone involved in the overthrow not guilty, completely contradicting the conclusion made by the Blunt Report. A few years later, the Queen's hopes would be dashed evermore. With the U.S. election of William McKinley in 1897, the presidency began considering something much more serious than simply not reinstating the Queen. The new president was now open to annexing Hawaii. Negotiations with annexationists began in the early summer of 1897, shortly into McKinley's presidency, and it seems that the president scarcely needed convincing. The Newlands Resolution was signed into law on January 7, 1898, officially annexing the Hawaiian Islands. Hawaii was now a territory of the United States of America. Over the next half-century, the people of Hawaii were forced to adapt to their new identity. The descendants of the early missionaries and immigrants were now flourishing, often still to the detriment of their Polynesian counterparts. Yet, when a referendum was held on June 27, 1959, 94.3% of the Hawaiian population voted in favor of statehood for the Hawaiian Islands. This was, ironically, after President Dwight Eisenhower had already signed the Hawaii Admission Act in March. Hawaii was already the 50th U.S. state.